atheists, agnostics, long-haired weirdos, short-haired weirdos, vandals, hooligans.
The government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government, love the government, hug the government.
Welcome to The Politics Guys, a place for bipartisan, rational, and civil debate on American politics and policy. I'm Northern Kentucky University political scientist Michael Baranowski. I'm joined today by my conservative counterpart, Cleveland area attorney and defender of freedom, Jay Carson.
Hey, good morning, Mike.
Hey, Jay, how you doing?
I'm good.
I'm doing okay myself. Well, I'm doing, I guess, as good as can be expected. But so, you know, there were a lot of things that we didn't get to in the weekend show just because we really wanted to get in depth. Well, especially that special counsel report and the reaction in those Trump court cases. But plenty of other things were going on that don't at least quite as directly involve Joe Biden or Donald Trump, though pretty much, I guess, everything.
It was a big week. Absent this other stuff, all of these would have been really big stories.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of these big stories is immigration, Ukraine, and Israel, that kind of trio of things, because for sort of a brief, shining bipartisan moment, right? It looked, Jay, as if you might be right. And there,
I know.
And there could actually
I was
be,
incorrect. Yeah. I will. Take the hit here. Yeah, I missed the call, but yeah,
it happens, you know. And but it looked for a little bit that there could be that deal on immigration, right? The Senate put together this package, but it didn't happen. And in fact, it ended up not being able to get even through this bipartisan Senate package. Couldn't even get past a filibuster in the Senate to even go to the House. And in fact, only 4 Republicans voted to end the filibuster. Susan Collins, Jim Lankford, Lisa Murkowski, and Mitt Romney. And honestly, of those 4, only one of them isn't considered a rhino, right? And that, of course, would be Lankford, who was one of the negotiators.
Well, I think he is now.
Yeah, exactly. And I should also point out that it didn't even win over all the chamber's Democrats. I mean, now, Schumer voted no on procedural grounds because that way he could reintroduce it in the future. But the other no's were Elizabeth Warren, Ed Markey, Alex Padilla, and Bob Menendez. And so just didn't go anywhere. And I think
they were all of the opinion because they believed it was too strict.
Yeah, exactly. So you can't win, right? But even if it had gotten
and
through,
perhaps Bob Menendez, because there's
what the hell?
How do I make money on this, right?
Exactly. There's nothing in it for him. But you know, it was clear, I think, that even if it had passed the Senate, Mike Johnson was clear that it was not going anywhere in the House. He called it a dead-on-arrival non-starter that would do more harm than good. Now, it was clearly a dead-on-arrival non-starter, but this idea that it would do more harm than good, at best, most charitably, would be highly questionable. And that's just not me, left of center, saying that. The Wall Street Journal's editorial board called the Senate's bill a border security bill worth passing and wrote, by any honest reckoning, it's the most restrictive migrant legislation in decades. And then they asked, do Republicans want to better secure the U.S. border, or do they want to keep what has become an open sore festering for another year as an election issue? Well, we got an answer to that.
Right.
And because
I don't want an open source.
Well, no, that's definitely. But the bill didn't give Republicans everything they wanted. But if you take a look at the details, I mean, it would have raised the bar for asylum from credible fear to reasonable possibility of persecution. That's a big difference. It would have required that migrants demonstrate that they couldn't have escaped persecution by moving somewhere else in their own country. It would have expedited the review process with the decision required within 90 to 180 days. It would have provided funding for 50,000 more detention beds and required overflow from that to be migrants to be enrolled in programs that would require things like ankle monitors or reporting curfew. So not just like a unsupervised, what's called catch and release. It would have ended the use.
Although there was I'm trying to think the wonderful sort of Orwellian phrase that came out of it was non-custodial detention. Which is,
But yeah, it's definitely a term of art, I guess you could say, but it may sound a little torn. But in addition to this too, it also would have ended that app, right? That a lot of folks on the right have a problem with. And it also would have had that emergency provision allowing the president to close the border. In fact, mandating that he close the border if the weekly average of migrants crossing is over 5,000. Basically, it was essentially a wish list of every single talking point that Republicans had about their problems with the border, why they couldn't sign on to a border bill. And that's why I think the bill wasn't just endorsed by the Wall Street Journal's editorial board, but by the Border Patrol Union. But in the end, of course, Donald Trump was against it because Donald Trump loves open festering sores. And there were just too many congressional Republicans who I think looked at the politics of this and said, you know what? We can't be for this because Trump is against it. So what was your take on this bill that ended up failing?
Well, again, I went in and maybe with rose-colored glasses because I predicted that there would be some sort of a deal. I think the biggest sticking point that I would have had if I were voting on it would have been the provisions that would have allowed Mayorkas, were essentially Biden, to waive a lot of these provisions if needed, because I think that the trust just wasn't there. In the sense was, well, it's sort of these apply unless we choose that they don't. To me, that was the biggest problem. Absent that, I tend to be a 3 yards in a cloud of dust kind of guy, right? I mean, let's take a win, even an incremental win.
Except this was not 3 yards in a cloud of dust. This was like a 20-yard reception kind of
yards.
win.
I would say it's 7 yards. How about that?
Well, okay. Well, we could disagree on that, but this was a big deal. This was, as the Journal correctly points out, would be the most restrictive border legislation in a long time. And,
I mean, part of that analysis is because, well, there hasn't really been any real border legislation in a long time.
But in a negotiation,
it's kind of the only border legislation.
It was not even a negotiation. It was basically damn near complete capitulation by Democrats who want to do something on this issue, and Republicans saying, nope, we didn't get every single thing we wanted. So no. And I don't even think that was the issue. I think the issue was that Donald Trump wants this as an issue. And so if you take Donald Trump out of this equation, I think this thing passes.
I think that's probably right. There's another piece of it, though, that, and again, maybe as far along as we are in the electoral season, it might not be an issue. But folks who would get primary challenges.
Well, sure. I mean,
there's that. And again, that of course ties into Donald Trump, who would find the primary challengers. But yeah, I think there might be, what I'm saying is I don't think it's all Donald Trump. I think some of these folks realize that they would have a lot of pressure back home voting for it. Now, partially because of, what Trump's saying. But what I'm saying is I'm drawing maybe an indirect line as opposed to a direct line.
Yeah. I think when you look at the politics of it now, there are some on the left who are arguing that this actually is a gift to Biden and the Democrats because essentially our side can say, well, we passed this, or we were willing to pass this incredibly restrictive thing, giving you everything that you want. And so therefore you didn't want to do this. So you're not serious about border security. But I got to say, I don't buy that argument. I wish it were true, but I don't think it is. And I think here's why, is that I think Republicans led by Donald Trump will make the case that it was a horrible bill. And they'll say things like it would have allowed free entry to 5,000 migrants a day. Now, that's actually not true, but that doesn't matter because it sounds good. And it kind of is like truth adjacent in some weird ways, right? My point is that Democrats have to defend the details of this bill. All Republicans have to say is we didn't vote for it because it wasn't tough enough. And I think that's the better.
And that's the way most legislation works, right?
Exactly. If you have to argue the details,
it has to defend every last detail in line in it, and those attacking it just have to say this bill's outrageous.
Yeah, and so I think it's pretty clear that, like I said, in answer to the Wall Street Journal's question, yes, the party decided that they would rather have the issue, and I don't think it's really because those folks who care about passing legislation, and not everyone in Congress certainly cares about passing legislation, really believe that they have a better shot at tougher legislation if Donald Trump is elected. I think it's just because, well, the focus is on elections, on getting elected and staying in power, and not necessarily on doing anything.
So my rejoinder to that would be that the extent that one of the concerns, this is what I brought up earlier about the ability to waive some of these provisions, but also just the concern that Republicans are going to make the point that no matter what law we put into place, the Biden administration won't enforce it. Now, that's sort of a difficult argument if you're in Congress, because then it's sort of, well, okay, what are you doing there? What's the point of all this? But I think politically, Biden is going to look weak on the border for a number of reasons. For example, all the first day executive orders and all his statements of, I can close down the border tomorrow, which leads people to say, well, okay, why don't you? Well, at the same time, they're seeing the optics, right, of the Texas Texas standoff, where, it appears that the federal government is trying to remove borders that Texas has erected. Now, I get all the supremacy clause arguments and all that, and we've talked about that. And I think as a constitutional law perspective, the government has the better side of those arguments.
But that's not the political argument. No, you're totally right here. And that's, what's the frustrating thing.
Because the optics, Mike, can you imagine here comes the federal agents cutting down the barbed wire, opening up. Yeah. Can you imagine that being on film?
Yeah, exactly. And so, when I think about this, I think this is where Donald Trump has an advantage because he doesn't actually care about the law. And so, it gives you a certain freedom of maneuver, right? And I think Joe Biden does in more of a significant way. And so, for instance, on the border, you can argue, you can make a non-ridiculous claim, as we made this argument a few weeks ago, that there is a provision in the Immigration and Nationality Act that gives the president the authority currently to close the border for national security reasons. Now, scholars and experts have argued that, well, it's not that clear cut and it would be legal challenge and it might not be upheld. That's true. But I think a Donald Trump would come in and do was say, I'm going to invoke this authority, and if I lose, I lose. And then I'll just say that the courts are crooked. But Joe Biden would say, well, no, I'm not going to do this because I don't have the clear authority. And yet, Joe Biden was willing to make this argument, a similar argument, with unclear authority when it came to canceling student loan debt. That's a problem. That's a big problem. And I think that's the sort of thing that gives me a lot of concern, right? So yeah, in the end, I think that this is really too bad because this would have, I think, made a real difference for a lot of people in a positive way. And in that sense, I am disappointed that this didn't pass. Politics aside, I think this would have been better policy, considerably better policy than what we have right now at the border. And I expect you agree.
Yeah, I would, like I said, I would tend to agree that doing something is better than doing nothing. Especially, and again, I could throw all kinds of aphorisms of again, bird in the hand's better than two in the bush type thing. And I think that's all right. I don't know that Republicans would have suffered a ton. I don't know. I could be completely mistaken on this because I think no matter what, Democrats, extremely difficult for Democrats to be seen as tough on the border. I think Republicans are always going to have that advantage on that issue, at least for the foreseeable future. So I think it's just a matter of, the Democrats just don't have credibility on that issue, given where we are and given what we've come through, and given things like New York and Washington D.C. saying they want to allow undocumented migrants to vote and all that kind of stuff that really doesn't help the larger piece of saying, oh, we're serious about immigration reform or serious about border security.
Yeah. And so during an election year, do you really want to give, if you're a Republican, do you really want to give Democrats a win on this issue? And so from a strategic standpoint, I think it makes sense, even though I think it's disappointing from a real world.
So my point would be, if you, and maybe you can't do it, right? but is that you could take the win and say, look, we got half of what we want, but we need to finish the job, right? That kind of thing.
That's a tougher argument. Again, that's arguing more of a kind of nuanced sort of thing. And I think the reality of it is, well, if we can either get this or we can get something else later. But if we get this, it's going to mean that we can't get more later. That's probably the legislative reality. We hope you enjoyed this preview of our supporters exclusive midweek show. If you'd like to hear the rest of the episode, we hope you'll consider becoming a supporter. Supporters get ad-free access to all of our shows, membership in our Politics Guys Discord group where you can join in on the conversation, and other benefits at different levels of support. To become a supporter, go to patreon.com/politicsguys. You can also support us through Venmo or @politicsguys or through PayPal. You'll find all of our support links in the show notes as well as at politicsguys.com/support. And if you'd like to get the midweek show, but you're not in a position to become a financial supporter, that's not a problem. Just send me an email at mike@politicsguys.com, and I'll be happy to get that set up for you.